The conference room felt smaller than usual as Jennifer Matthews, the CEO's wife, sat across from me with her arms crossed and a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. The mahogany table between us seemed to stretch endlessly, creating a physical barrier that matched the emotional distance I could feel building with every passing second. I should have known something was wrong when HR called me in for an unscheduled meeting on a Tuesday afternoon, especially when Margaret from Human Resources had sounded unusually formal and distant on the phone. But nothing could have prepared me for what she was about to say, and certainly nothing in my 3 years of climbing the corporate ladder at Davidson Marketing Group in downtown Chicago had prepared me for this level of professional betrayal. I thought I had finally found my place in the company, carved out a niche where my skills and dedication were not just recognized but celebrated. But apparently, I had become too successful for someone's comfort, too visible in an organization where certain people preferred to control who got noticed and who remained in the shadows. My name is Sarah Chun, and I'm 28 years old, working as a senior marketing coordinator at one of Chicago's most prestigious advertising firms. The September wind was howling outside the 40th floor windows of our Michigan Avenue office building, rattling the glass panels as autumn settled over the city with its characteristic chill and gray skies that seemed to mirror the tension building in that sterile conference room. I had grown up in a middle-class family in the suburbs of Schaumburg, the daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had. My parents, both engineers who had worked multiple jobs to put me through Northwestern University, had instilled in me a work ethic that bordered on obsessive and a belief that merit and dedication would always be rewarded in America. They had taught me that success came from outworking everyone around you, from being the first person in the office every morning and the last to leave every night, from treating every project as if your career depended on it because, in many ways, it did. Please subscribe to our channel to help us bring you more real stories like this one, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we continue sharing authentic experiences that matter. The meeting had started innocently enough, with Margaret from HR explaining that they were conducting routine feedback sessions with high-performing employees. Margaret was a woman in her 50s who had been with the company for over a decade, someone I had always respected for her fairness and professionalism in handling delicate personnel matters. She wore her usual conservative gray suit and had her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun that spoke to her no-nonsense approach to corporate life. I had been flattered initially, thinking this might be about a promotion or a raise, especially after the success of our recent campaign for Midwest Financial Services that had brought in over $2 million in new business and had been featured in 3 different industry publications as an example of innovative strategic thinking. The campaign had involved a complete rebranding of their consumer lending products and had required months of market research, consumer testing, and creative development that had stretched our team's capabilities, but had ultimately resulted in a 30% increase in loan applications and a significant improvement in brand recognition among target demographics. But then Jennifer Matthews walked in, and the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically, as if someone had suddenly sucked all the oxygen out of the space and replaced it with something thick and suffocating. Jennifer was everything I wasn't: blonde, perfectly manicured, and married to the company founder. She wore a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent in my Lincoln Park apartment, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never had to prove her worth in a professional setting. Her perfectly styled hair caught the fluorescent light as she moved, and her designer handbag sat on the table like a declaration of status and privilege. Her husband Richard had built Davidson Marketing from the ground up 25 years ago, starting with just 3 employees in a cramped office above a delicatessen on the South Side, surviving on determination, creativity, and countless 18-hour days that had turned his hair prematurely gray, but had also established him as one of the most respected figures in Chicago's advertising community. Now we employed over 200 people across 3 floors of prime real estate in the Loop and handled accounts for some of the biggest names in the Midwest, from Fortune 500 corporations to emerging tech startups that were reshaping entire industries. The company's success story had been featured in Chicago Business Magazine, Crain's Chicago Business, and even earned a mention in Advertising Age as an example of how regional agencies could compete with the major New York and Los Angeles firms by focusing on authentic relationships and deep understanding of local markets. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being criticized for visibility by a woman whose only qualification for being in that room was her marriage certificate. Jennifer had joined the company 2 years ago as a strategic consultant, though nobody could quite explain what that meant in practical terms, and her arrival had coincided with a noticeable shift in office dynamics that many longtime employees had privately discussed in hushed conversations over coffee and during lunch breaks at nearby restaurants. She attended board meetings where she offered opinions on creative campaigns she had no hand in developing, weighed in on client strategy for accounts she had never managed, and somehow had influence over personnel matters despite having no formal training in marketing, human resources, or business management. Her background, as far as anyone could determine, consisted of a liberal arts degree from a private college in Connecticut, a brief stint as a gallery coordinator at an art museum, and several years as a socialite involved in charity fundraising events that had more to do with networking and social status than with any meaningful contribution to the causes they purported to support. Margaret cleared her throat nervously and opened a manila folder that contained what appeared to be a lengthy document. She began reading from it in a monotone voice that suggested she was as uncomfortable with this conversation as I was. The feedback, she explained, had come from multiple sources within the company who felt that my approach to collaboration and team dynamics needed adjustment. Jennifer leaned forward in her chair, her diamond wedding ring catching the fluorescent light as she placed her hands flat on the conference table. She spoke in a voice that was deliberately calm but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. She told me that several colleagues had expressed concerns about my tendency to dominate meetings and my apparent need to be the center of attention during client presentations. I felt my stomach drop as she continued speaking, listing specific examples that made it clear someone had been documenting my behavior for weeks or possibly months, maintaining detailed records of my interactions with colleagues and clients in a way that felt both intrusive and calculated. She mentioned the presentation I had given to the Hartwell Corporation Board of Directors, where I had received a standing ovation and 3 board members had specifically requested to work with me on future projects, praising my insights into consumer behavior and my ability to translate complex market research into actionable business strategies. She described it as showboating and undermining team cohesion, suggesting that my success had somehow diminished the contributions of other team members rather than elevating the entire organization's reputation. She also referenced a client dinner I had attended the previous month, where the CEO of a major retail chain had complimented our agency's strategic thinking and had specifically mentioned how impressed he was with the depth of analysis I had provided during their product launch planning. According to Jennifer, this had created an inappropriate dynamic where clients were developing personal preferences for specific team members rather than viewing Davidson Marketing as a unified service provider. The charges felt surreal and completely detached from reality, like listening to someone describe a parallel universe where success was viewed as a character flaw and achievement was treated as a form of corporate misconduct. I had always prided myself on being collaborative and supportive of my colleagues, regularly sharing credit for successful campaigns, and going out of my way to mentor newer employees who were still learning the ropes of client management and creative development. I had organized informal training sessions for junior staff members, sharing presentation techniques and strategic thinking frameworks that had taken me years to develop and refine. My quarterly reviews had been consistently excellent, with specific praise for my ability to work effectively with diverse teams and my talent for bringing out the best in other people's ideas. My supervisor, David Richardson, had recommended me for a promotion just 6 months earlier, specifically citing my leadership potential and my positive impact on departmental morale and productivity. As Jennifer continued speaking, her voice taking on a more authoritative tone that suggested this conversation was a formality rather than a genuine dialogue, I began to understand what was really happening beneath the surface of these carefully crafted accusations. She mentioned my recent feature in Chicago Business Journal, where I had been profiled as one of the city's rising young marketing professionals under 30, an honor that had come with a 3-page article that included interviews with several clients who had specifically praised my strategic insights and creative problem-solving abilities. The article had included a photo of me in our office lobby, standing next to the company logo with the Chicago skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me, and had highlighted my role in several high-profile campaigns that had significantly boosted Davidson Marketing's reputation in the industry and had led to inquiries from potential clients in markets we had never previously penetrated, including opportunities in Milwaukee, Detroit, and even some preliminary discussions about expansion into the Twin Cities market. She also brought up the keynote speech I had been invited to give at the Midwest Marketing Conference the previous month, where I had represented our company in front of over 500 industry professionals from across the region, delivering a presentation on integrated digital marketing strategies that had been months in the making and had required extensive research into emerging trends and consumer behavior patterns. The speech had gone exceptionally well, earning me a spot on a panel discussion about the future of regional advertising and generating significant interest from conference attendees who approached me afterward to exchange business cards and discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Several potential clients had contacted us in the weeks following the conference, specifically mentioning my presentation as their introduction to Davidson Marketing and expressing interest in working with our team on upcoming campaigns. But according to Jennifer, this had created an inappropriate dynamic where clients were requesting to work specifically with me rather than treating the company as a unified entity, somehow diminishing the collective strength of our organization rather than demonstrating the depth of talent and expertise that made us competitive in a crowded marketplace. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Jennifer outlined a plan for addressing these concerns. I would be reassigned to work exclusively on internal projects for the next 90 days, with no client-facing responsibilities. My name would be removed from all external marketing materials, including our website and promotional brochures. I would no longer be permitted to attend industry events or conferences as a company representative, and any speaking engagements would need to be declined immediately. The punishment felt completely disproportionate to the alleged offense, and I struggled to maintain my composure as the full implications of what they were proposing began to sink in. Being removed from client work would effectively stall my career progression and damage my professional reputation within the industry. It would also significantly reduce my value to the company, potentially setting me up for termination during the next round of budget cuts. I asked Jennifer to be more specific about the complaints against me, requesting names and concrete examples of inappropriate behavior. She responded by saying that the sources wished to remain anonymous, but assured me that the feedback had been thoroughly vetted by senior management. When I pressed further, asking if Richard was aware of this decision, her expression hardened noticeably. She informed me that her husband was fully supportive of the action being taken and had personally signed off on the reassignment. This revelation hit me particularly hard because Richard had been a mentor to me since I joined the company. He had encouraged me to take on challenging projects, had supported my professional development, and had frequently praised my contributions during team meetings. The meeting concluded with Margaret handing me a formal written notice outlining the terms of my reassignment and a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the matter with other employees. I was given 24 hours to review the documents and provide a written response indicating my acceptance of the new arrangement. Walking back to my office through the maze of cubicles and conference rooms that had been my professional home for 3 years, I felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and betrayal that was almost overwhelming, like trying to navigate through thick fog while carrying a weight that grew heavier with each step. The familiar sounds of office life, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, conversations about client deadlines and creative concepts, suddenly felt foreign and distant, as if I was observing someone else's workplace rather than returning to my own professional environment. My colleagues looked up as I passed, some offering friendly smiles and casual greetings that felt painfully normal, given what had just transpired in that conference room. They had no idea that I had just been systematically removed from the work that defined my professional identity, stripped of responsibilities that I had spent years earning and that represented not just my current role but my future career trajectory. Lisa from the creative department waved at me from across the bullpen, probably wondering why I looked so pale and distracted. Mike from account management called out a question about the Henderson Industries proposal that was due the following week. Not knowing that I would no longer be permitted to contribute to client-facing projects or offer the strategic insights that had made that account one of our most profitable relationships. My office overlooked Grant Park, and I stood at the window watching the late afternoon foot traffic below as office workers began their evening commutes. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and red, creating a stark contrast against the gray concrete sidewalks and the steel framework of the elevated train tracks. It was the kind of view that had always inspired me and reminded me why I loved working in the heart of the city. I spent that evening in my apartment, poring over the documents Margaret had given me and trying to make sense of what had happened, reading and rereading every paragraph until the words began to blur together in the lamplight of my small dining room table. My Lincoln Park apartment was modest but comfortable, furnished with pieces I had collected over the years as my career progressed and my income allowed for small upgrades from my post-graduation days of second-hand furniture and ramen noodle dinners. The view from my living room window looked out onto a tree-lined street where young professionals walked their dogs and families pushed strollers toward the nearby park, a scene of normal life that felt impossibly distant from the corporate drama that was now consuming my thoughts. The non-disclosure agreement was particularly troubling because it would prevent me from seeking advice from colleagues or even discussing the situation with friends who worked in the industry, people who had become not just professional contacts but genuine supporters who understood the challenges of building a career in such a competitive field. It felt designed to isolate me and prevent me from building any kind of support network that could help me navigate this unprecedented situation or provide perspective on whether my treatment was typical of corporate politics or represented something more unusual and potentially actionable. The more I thought about it, analyzing every detail of the conversation and every nuance of Jennifer's body language and tone, the more convinced I became that this was retaliation for my growing profile within the company and the industry at large, a calculated attempt to neutralize what she perceived as a threat to her own position and influence within the organization. Jennifer had made it clear during our conversation that she viewed my success as problematic, but I couldn't understand why my achievements would be seen as threatening rather than beneficial to the organization, especially when those achievements had directly contributed to increased revenue, enhanced reputation, and expanded market opportunities that benefited everyone employed by Davidson Marketing. I began to piece together a pattern of behavior that I had previously dismissed as coincidental or unimportant, small incidents over the past several months that now seemed to form a deliberate strategy of undermining my position and credibility within the company. There had been meetings where my input was suddenly deemed unnecessary, creative sessions where my ideas were politely acknowledged but never developed further, and client interactions where Jennifer or her allies would subtly redirect conversations away from topics where I had particular expertise or where my contributions might shine too brightly in comparison to others. I decided to request a meeting with Richard directly, hoping to get his perspective on the situation and to understand how someone who had been so supportive of my career could suddenly view me as a liability that needed to be managed and contained rather than an asset to be developed and promoted. Getting on his calendar proved more difficult than usual, with his assistant explaining that he was dealing with some urgent client matters and wouldn't be available for individual meetings for at least 2 weeks, a delay that felt both frustrating and suspicious given that Richard had always maintained an open-door policy for senior staff members and had previously made time for impromptu discussions about strategic direction and career development. His assistant, Carol, who had always been friendly and accommodating when I needed to schedule meetings or clarify project priorities, now seemed distant and formal, speaking in clipped sentences that suggested she had received specific instructions about limiting my access to Richard's time and attention. The change in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable, another small indication that my status within the organization had fundamentally shifted in ways that extended far beyond the specific restrictions outlined in my reassignment documents. During those 2 weeks, I complied with the terms of my reassignment and focused exclusively on internal projects, though the transition felt like professional exile in a workplace that had previously celebrated my contributions and sought my input on major strategic decisions. I was given responsibility for updating employee training materials and reorganizing our client database, tasks that were important for organizational efficiency but hardly utilized my skills and experience in strategic planning, creative development, and client relationship management that had made me valuable to the company in the first place. The work felt like busy work designed to keep me occupied and out of sight rather than contributing meaningfully to the company's success or advancing my own professional development. I found myself spending hours formatting PowerPoint presentations about company policies and procedures, reviewing outdated contact information for clients I was no longer permitted to interact with, and creating organizational charts that documented reporting relationships I was now excluded from participating in. The irony of being assigned to document the very structures and processes from which I had been systematically removed was not lost on me, and each day brought fresh reminders of how dramatically my role and status had changed within the organization. My colleagues began to notice my absence from client meetings and external events, and several asked if I was feeling well or if something had changed in my role. Their questions, delivered with the kind of concerned curiosity that suggested office gossip, was beginning to circulate about my sudden disappearance from high-profile projects and strategic planning sessions. The non-disclosure agreement made it impossible to explain what was happening, so I found myself making vague excuses about focusing on special projects and internal initiatives, responses that felt increasingly hollow and unconvincing as the weeks passed and my colleagues realized that my contributions to their work had simply vanished without explanation. Tom from the analytics team asked why I wasn't participating in the quarterly performance review that traditionally included input from all senior coordinators, while Jennifer from creative development wondered why my name had been removed from the masthead of our quarterly client newsletter, a publication that had featured my byline for over 2 years and had helped establish my reputation as a thought leader within the organization. These conversations were painful reminders of how thoroughly I had been erased from the visible aspects of the company's operations, as if someone was systematically removing all evidence of my contributions and impact. The isolation was more difficult than I had anticipated, both professionally and emotionally, creating a sense of disconnection that affected not just my work performance but my overall sense of purpose and professional identity. Marketing is fundamentally a collaborative field that thrives on the exchange of ideas, the building of creative momentum through group brainstorming sessions, and the development of strategic insights through ongoing dialogue with clients and colleagues who bring different perspectives and areas of expertise to complex business challenges. Being cut off from the creative energy and strategic thinking that drove our most successful campaigns felt like professional exile, as if I had been placed in solitary confinement while the rest of the organization continued to function and grow around me. I watched from the sidelines as my former projects were reassigned to other team members, many of whom lacked the institutional knowledge and client relationships I had spent years building through countless meetings, presentations, and collaborative problem-solving sessions that had created trust and understanding between our agency and the businesses we served. It was particularly painful to see opportunities one had been developing, including a potential expansion into the healthcare sector that had been months in the making, handed over to colleagues who would have to start from scratch in building credibility and understanding with decision-makers who had specifically requested to work with me based on my track record and industry expertise. 3 weeks into my reassignment, I received a call from David Morrison, the marketing director at Hartwell Corporation, asking why I hadn't been involved in their recent campaign planning sessions and expressing confusion about the apparent changes in our team structure and client service approach. David and I had worked together on several successful projects over the past 18 months, developing a professional relationship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to innovative marketing strategies that delivered measurable results for his organization. He had specifically requested my input on their upcoming product launch for a new line of sustainable consumer goods, a project that represented a significant departure from their traditional product offerings and required the kind of strategic thinking and market analysis that had become my specialty within Davidson Marketing. When I explained that I was currently focused on internal projects and would not be available for client-facing work in the immediate future, he expressed confusion and disappointment, noting that Hartwell had specifically chosen to continue working with our agency based on the quality of strategic insights and creative solutions I had provided during their previous campaigns. The conversation was awkward and painful, requiring me to dance around the truth while trying to maintain professional relationships that had taken years to develop and that represented significant value to both organizations involved. This conversation made me realize that my enforced invisibility was beginning to damage not just my own reputation but also the company's relationships with key clients. David mentioned that Hartwell was considering working with a different agency for their next major campaign because they felt our team dynamics had changed and our recent proposals lacked the strategic insight they had come to expect from Davidson Marketing. I documented this conversation and several similar interactions with other clients who had noticed my absence and expressed concerns about the continuity of their accounts. It became clear that Jennifer's attempt to make me less visible was actually creating exactly the kind of problems she claimed to be trying to solve, as clients began questioning our stability and consistency as a service provider. When I finally met with Richard 4 weeks after my reassignment began, the conversation took place in his corner office with its panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the bustling activity of Navy Pier in the distance, a setting that had always inspired me during previous meetings but now felt somehow diminished by the circumstances that had brought us together. Richard seemed surprised by many of the details I shared about my conversation with Jennifer and Margaret, his eyebrows rising as I described the specific restrictions that had been imposed on my role and the extensive documentation that had apparently been compiled about my professional activities over the previous months. He acknowledged that he had approved some changes to my role, but claimed he hadn't fully understood the scope of the restrictions being imposed or the potential impact they might have on client relationships and ongoing projects that depended on continuity and expertise that took years to develop. He seemed genuinely concerned about the client feedback I had received and admitted that the company had lost 2 potential accounts during the previous month, including a major retail chain that had been considering a significant advertising campaign that could have represented millions of dollars in revenue over the next 3 years. As we talked, leaning forward in the leather chairs that surrounded his conference table, it became clear that he was beginning to question the wisdom of the decision and to realize that the information he had received about my situation might not have provided a complete or accurate picture of the circumstances and motivations involved. Richard explained that Jennifer had presented my situation as a team cohesion issue that required delicate handling to prevent disruption to other employees. He had trusted her assessment and had agreed to the reassignment without fully investigating the specific allegations or considering the potential impact on client relationships. As we talked, it became clear that he was beginning to question the wisdom of the decision. The breakthrough came during our annual strategy planning session in late October, when the leadership team was reviewing performance metrics and planning for the upcoming year. Despite my limited role, I had been included in the meeting because of my historical involvement in strategic planning and my knowledge of long-term client relationships. Jennifer was presenting her assessment of the company's market position and growth opportunities when she made a significant error in her analysis of our competitive landscape. She incorrectly characterized our main competitor's recent acquisition strategy and proposed that we respond with a service expansion that would have put us in direct conflict with 3 of our largest existing clients. I found myself in an impossible position. The strategy she was proposing would likely result in the loss of millions of dollars in annual revenue and could potentially damage relationships we had spent years building. However, correcting her in front of the senior leadership team would violate the spirit, if not the letter, of my agreement to maintain a lower profile. After several minutes of listening to Jennifer elaborate on her flawed analysis, I made the decision to speak up. I presented a detailed explanation of why her proposed strategy was problematic, backed up with specific data about client contracts and competitor activities that contradicted her assumptions. The room fell silent as I laid out an alternative approach that would allow us to expand our services without jeopardizing existing relationships. Richard looked stunned as he realized the implications of what I was saying. If the leadership team had moved forward with Jennifer's proposal without my input, the company could have suffered significant financial losses and reputational damage. Other senior managers began asking questions about the analysis I had presented, and it became clear that my institutional knowledge and strategic thinking were far more valuable than anyone had recently acknowledged. Jennifer's face grew progressively redder as the meeting continued, and her proposal was systematically dismantled by the questions and concerns raised by other team members. She attempted to defend her analysis but lacked the detailed knowledge of client relationships and competitor activities necessary to address the specific issues that were being raised. The meeting ended with Richard asking me to prepare a detailed strategic assessment that could serve as the foundation for the company's expansion planning. He also requested that I resume my client-facing responsibilities immediately, citing the feedback he had received from several major accounts about the importance of continuity in their service relationships. As the other managers filed out of the conference room, Jennifer remained seated, staring at me with an expression that was equal parts anger and disbelief. She had spent months trying to reduce my visibility and influence within the company, only to see her efforts backfire spectacularly in the most public forum possible. Richard approached me after everyone else had left and offered what amounted to an apology, though he framed it as a recognition that the company's approach to team management needed to be more strategic and less reactive. He acknowledged that my contributions were essential to the company's success, and that attempts to minimize my role had been counterproductive. The conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with the organization and my understanding of workplace politics. I realized that success in a corporate environment requires not just professional competence, but also the ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics and competing interests within the leadership structure. Over the following months, my role was not only restored but significantly expanded. I was promoted to senior strategic consultant with responsibility for overseeing major client relationships and leading the company's expansion into new market segments. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase and equity participation that made me a part owner in the business I had helped to build. Jennifer's role, meanwhile, became increasingly ceremonial. While she retained her title as strategic consultant, her involvement in day-to-day operations was gradually reduced, and her input on major decisions was no longer solicited or seriously considered. The leadership team had learned from the near disaster of her expansion proposal and became more careful about distinguishing between actual expertise and positional authority. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of documenting professional achievements, maintaining strong client relationships, and building support networks that extend beyond any single organization. It also highlighted the reality that workplace conflicts are often more about power dynamics and personal insecurities than about actual performance or professional competence. Looking back, I realized that Jennifer's attempt to make me invisible actually had the opposite effect, forcing me to demonstrate my value in a way that might never have been necessary under normal circumstances. The crisis created an opportunity for me to showcase skills and knowledge that had previously been taken for granted, ultimately leading to greater recognition and responsibility than I might have achieved through conventional career progression. The situation also strengthened my relationship with Richard and other senior leaders who gained a deeper appreciation for the complexity of client management and strategic planning. They learned that effective leadership requires understanding not just what people contribute to an organization, but how those contributions fit together to create value for clients and stakeholders. Today, Davidson Marketing Group continues to thrive as one of Chicago's premier advertising agencies, and I've played a significant role in its growth and success. The company now has clear policies about performance evaluation and role assignments that prevent the kind of arbitrary decision-making that characterized my temporary reassignment. We've also developed stronger protocols for client relationship management that ensure continuity and consistency in service delivery. The winter wind still rattles the windows of our Michigan Avenue offices, and the view of Grant Park still inspires me every morning as I arrive at work. But my perspective on the corporate landscape has matured significantly, shaped by the understanding that professional success requires both competence and political awareness, both individual achievement and collaborative effectiveness. My story serves as a reminder that workplace challenges, even those that seem insurmountable at first, can ultimately become opportunities for growth and advancement. Sometimes being pushed into the background forces you to step forward in ways that reveal strengths and capabilities that might otherwise remain hidden. The key is maintaining professionalism and focus on results, even when facing opposition from unexpected sources. The experience also reinforced my belief in the importance of authentic leadership and the dangers of allowing personal relationships to interfere with business judgment. Organizations thrive when decisions are based on merit and strategic thinking rather than on favoritism or political maneuvering. Building a successful career requires navigating these dynamics while staying true to your professional values and commitment to excellence. For anyone facing similar challenges in their own workplace, remember that visibility isn't about seeking attention or recognition for its own sake, but about demonstrating value and contributing to organizational success. Sometimes the best response to criticism is simply to continue doing excellent work and letting results speak for themselves. Professional reputation is built over time through consistent performance and ethical behavior, and no individual or personal agenda can diminish achievements that are grounded in genuine competence and dedication to excellence.